marriage is not worthwhile for a Western man living in the West. Thank you for attending my TED Talk.
Would it shock you to know that that's basically how this entire debate goes? Superficial talking points, some of which are based in reality, and then Andrew trying to get nuance. So he could have talked more about prenups. That's something that Andrew did a lot in his debate with Coach Craig Adams. Basically, the mitigation strategies are look at sort of what's going on with these churches, like the Orthodox Church, Catholics, people that go to church a lot. What makes their marriages so much more successful? And then look at tools like prenups. And that's what you as an individual could do to significantly mitigate your risk. But here's the thing. A lot of people, myself included, when you analyze debates, it's easy after the fact to say, well, you could have said this, you could have said that. Where? Where could have Andrew said this and talked about it more? See, the problem is, Rich was singularly focused. He didn't understand a lot of what Andrew was trying to say. Andrew was basically stuck on his first point the entire debate because Rich didn't get it. Even at the end of the debate, where Andrew says to Rich, can you steelman my position? Andrew first steelmans Rich's position, and Rich says, yeah, that's my position. Rich, right out of the gates, like, your position is we should all convert to orthodoxy. That is not Andrew's position. And if you read the comments after in this thread here with Rich Cooper, so many of them are like, Rich's suggestion was to get rich. Yes, that was his suggestion. Andrew's suggestion was to become Orthodox. No, that was not Andrew's suggestion. Now, would Andrew recommend that you become Orthodox? Yeah, he might say, but not just for marriage. But that's not the argument he's making. The problem is, Andrew tries a million ways to explain it, and it's just not hitting home. Let me try to make Andrew's argument in a way that maybe people that are misunderstanding can understand. The Amish very rarely get divorced. We all agree? Amish community almost never get divorced. Now, do I think religious-wise that the Amish are the absolute correct religious interpretation? No, I don't. I'm not telling you, if you want a good marriage, become Amish. Do you see? What I'm saying is, what is it about the Amish community that makes marriages work? Why does that also seem to work for the Orthodox community and the devout Catholic community? Protestants that go to church more often. What is the characteristics? The red pill guys should understand this, because when they're looking, like one of the things Rich keeps saying, if you try to get a long-term relationship, you should vet. You should vet your person, right? Right. In other words, we say, what are traditional signs that we see that you would expect would lead to a successful relationship? This is smart, right? Now, by vet, you could mean different things. But in general, I think it's a good idea to say, look, if you think of taking a serious step in a relationship, whether it be, I still think having sex is a serious step. Maybe I'm the only person in the fucking world. But having sex, moving in with someone, going on vacation with them, whatever, you should probably try to learn a little about this person before you do that. Is this the type of person that went to jail for domestic assault? Might raise some red flags. Does this person seem like someone who's only in it for the money? May raise some red flags. Do they have an OnlyFans account? You see? Same is true when we're talking about marriage. What are the characteristics we would look at that we could usually say, that led out being a successful marriage? And what Andrew's saying is, yeah, people are getting it. Community, shared value structure. Yes, the point Andrew's making the most in this debate is it's because the community. And what happens is, if you, and this is from the perspective of a man talking about getting married to a woman, a lot of times what we can see is women become more likely to proceed with divorce, to cheat, etc., that are around other women that have done those things. So if your wife is hanging out with a bunch of divorcees who likes to go out on Friday night and just fuck a bunch of dudes at the bar, guess what? It makes it more likely that your marriage will end in divorce. If your wife is going with you to church and her friends and her community are all people that are still married, that have a network of people to help them when problems inevitably come up in marriage, like your priest, your marriage is more likely to be successful. Now, does this mean that the lesson you take from that is, I have to become Amish, I have to become Orthodox, I have to become Catholic? No. What you could glean from that is, Who I surround myself with matters. Maybe you're an atheist or an agnostic or secular or whatever. This is still a lesson that you could take, advice that you could take. If I'm hanging out with people that are just doing random hookups at the bar every other week, and my wife's hanging out with those people, it means that my chance of having a successful marriage significantly diminishes. But they don't understand. So you're saying I have to become Orthodox. No, that's not the point that's being made here. Then there's further points. You could get a prenup. Now, the problem is there's so much to say on this topic, but when you can't get out of the gate, and again, listen, I'm not going to play the whole debate. Here's part of Andrew's opening statement. It's clear that this is what he's saying.
It's an interesting phenomenon when you get two men together who agree on many, many things, but disagree on some core issues. So kind of the audience is now in a position to see the clash of ideas and make up their own mind. That's what the point is. In this particular case, we're diving into if marriage in the West is good for men. For the Christian ethicist, in this case me, this is a tough topic to navigate because it's full of nuance and the ideas have to be scrutinized through a lens of non-Christians. And you have to do that so that they'll understand where you're coming from. And I need to do it in a way that still supports the Christian view. Many people have trouble with nuance because they take critical thinking about a position as the adoption of the position itself. This is mostly just due to the fact that many people are fucking stupid. And there isn't anything I can do about that, so I don't even try. Instead, I want to meet them where they are and criticize the portions of the ideology I think are incorrect and allow them to do the same. In the case of Mr. Cooper, we will tangle on this core idea. Is marriage worth it or not? That's what it's going to come down to. And to explore Mr. Cooper's view on this, I've taken some time to review a lot of his content. I haven't read his entire book, but I have read many excerpts from it. And so, of course, I'm not going to be able to glean all the insight. I just didn't have time to read it. But here's what I got of his basic view. His view is totally rational, according to both his book and online videos. Essentially, the view is that the risk of marriage is due to the overlapping of the state, and in the view of a contract, it's a really bad deal for men. Because marriage is a contract with the state, and the state is seemingly biased against men, men have a lot to lose when it comes to assets, and their most important asset, which is their children, to rulings which are unfair to the man when it comes to divorces. This is mostly true, and you're not going to get any argument from me on this. Further, he expands that the chances of divorce are very high. He cites 50% in many cases, but it's actually closer to 40, at least for first-time marriages. But in the spirit of good faith, I'm also going to kind of concede that that's pretty damn high. So another point of concession there. The rub comes in when we start to dive into these numbers, as they're actually very deceptive. Let me give you an example of why we have to be cautious on this. An off-cited reference by the Manosphere is that while it's true, men are most of the workplace fatalities which happen in the USA, especially the total, these fatalities are quite low. You'll hear feminists talk about this as well. That's kind of an overlap that they have, at least in totality. But the reason why this is important is because when we break down the fields in which men are actually dying, the majority of them are in construction, logging, and fishing. So if you wanted to mitigate risk when it came to work, for instance, you would probably tell men not to avoid working in jobs which are physically perilous, but to avoid working in specific jobs which are very perilous, because those are where you're going to incur the most amount of risk of death. Which means in order to avoid these risks in the workplace and serious injury, these fields are likely best avoided. And that's how you would do risk mitigation in marriage. It's no different. There are high-risk groups and there's low-risk groups. The Amish, for instance, have an almost zero divorce rate. You heard that right, zero. You can source this from Amish studies at Elizabethtown College, with researchers confirming this. Mennonites are about 1%, Mormons 18%, same with Catholics, Orthodox Christians even less than that, 11% to 12%. Muslims very low as well. Atheists surprisingly have only an 11% chance, but that's because they basically avoid marriage and get married very late in life. Christians in name only, or what are considered nominal Christians, these are people who don't go to church, they don't really do much in the way of religious practices, actually have a much higher percentage rate of getting divorced because of the self-ID. And there basically isn't anything to distinguish them from secularists or agnostics, and that's why those numbers are so high. When broken down by group, It gets even more low the more religious you are. And if you add a prenup to it, the risk becomes almost non-existent for most people. Suddenly, the threat of divorce seems actually quite low, depending on the group you're a part of. While I would suppose you wouldn't want to be part of the 17 or 18% in these groups, telling men that they have an 80 or 90% chance that their marriage will work out shifts the picture entirely. The breakdown is suddenly far less daunting, and the risk is now much more manageable as far as these categories go. This nuance is often missed in this conversation, but it should be highlighted. Marriage isn't very risky for people in these groups. It's risky for people who are in the secular groups, because those groups map on to the national average almost identically, about 39% to 41%. Give you an example of this, 5 to 10% of people who ever drink alcohol will become alcoholics. That could be argued to be very, very, very high risk, I suppose, but most men look at the risk factor and consider the trade-off acceptable and reasonably low for what they get out of the behavior of socially drinking. So as to the question, is marriage worth it in the West, specifically here in the United States, which is what we're talking about, for many men, yes, and for many men, no. Specifically secular men, it seems to be a big fat no. Their risk is on par with the national average, like I said, and this leads to cohabitation likelihoods, which become much higher, which leads to high risk for abuse for their children, along with other negative outcomes for their family dynamics. And those are the actual facts of the matter. Now, perhaps my opponent and I can agree these are facts, but he's going to dive in.
Well,
And my opponent's ready after his.
so it's clear that what he's saying is for secular men, marriage pretty much doesn't make sense, right? For those that are religious and have these community, and he later talks about why this is the case because of their community sports, it seems to be much more likely to make sense. You can significantly mitigate your risk. Now, just for contrast, here's Rich Cooper's opening.
All right, Rich, you can have 6 minutes or so. Take as much or as little as you'd like.
Yeah, I won't need it. No, marriage is not worthwhile for a Western man living in the West. Thank you for attending my TED Talk.
Would it shock you to know that that's basically how this entire debate goes? Superficial talking points, some of which are based in reality, and then Andrew trying to get nuanced. For example, there was a lot of discussion on Christians in general and divorce rates. And Andrew's like, you're right. When it comes to people that self-identify as Christian, a lot of them aren't doing very well when it comes to the marriage numbers. However, if we parse out individual groups, why is it, for example, that Catholics are doing so much better than just Christians as a whole? Why is it that Orthodox are? Why is it that Amish are? Why is it that Mormons are? And his response, Andrew's answer to this is because many people that identify as Christian are just nominal Christians. They call themselves Christian, but they're not engaged in sacraments. They're not going to church every week. They're not doing community activities with the church. They rarely go to church, and if they do, it's a chore they have to do, and they can't wait to get home. That's different than people that are attending the Catholic Church, the Orthodox Church, or even what Andrew would later call high Protestants that are taking going to church seriously. To which Richard's response is, yeah, but Christians do bad. He's not understanding the nuance. Now, for me, the way I would approach this debate is similar to what Andrew did, but slightly different. Because of just being fucking mush-brained from doing debate in college, I view debate in what I call an offense-defense paradigm. In order to win, you need offensive positions. So if we're starting with the question of, is it worth it to get married? I would say, what does an average situation look like of a person who's married versus the average situation of a man who's not married? So I would talk about that. Data shows that men that never get married perform worse than men that get married and stay happily married. Next, how many men end up divorced? Well, first-time marriages, 40% end in divorce. That means that's a high number. That sucks. But that means 60% don't. Now, it is true that something like 50% of all marriages end in divorce, but surprise, surprise, you want to know why that is? Because after you get divorced once and you get remarried, your chance of getting divorced again skyrocket. So the number that what we're really concerned with, you, an individual, what is the likelihood, you, the guy, if you get married, that it'll end in divorce? And the answer is 40%. Once you get divorced once, You're likely to get divorced again if you get remarried, but it's 40%. Now, this is a different picture than what's being promoted by a lot of these people. Right out of the gate, all the problems of alimony, child support, custody battles, etc., that are horrific. It's still the minority of marriages. Now, that's not to say that the remaining 60% that stay married are in good relationships. Maybe not. But what are we comparing it to? Do you think the guy that doesn't get married and is just out fucking bitches when he feels like it? You think he's markedly happier? Data doesn't seem to show that. Do you think the guy that's not married but's just cohabitating, he's markedly happier? No. Data doesn't show that either. In fact, almost all the data shows in all of the things that are terrible about divorces, it's actually worse with cohabitations that break up. For example, if you want to talk about custody issues of a married man and woman who have a child and then get divorced, you're preaching to the choir. I agree. It's egregious how bad custody courts favor women. But it's even worse if the man and woman cohabitated and had a child and weren't married. The father's rights are even more thrown out the window. So how is the position of not getting married and instead just cohabitate, how does that solve that issue? So there's a lot of reasons that you should get married. There's a lot of reasons that you shouldn't. But you would be lying to say that there aren't positives to being married. If I could make the manosphere argument, tell me if I'm wrong, that would be done in the most honest way possible from my perspective, it would be this. Of course, there are benefits to getting married. Marriages that work out, those men do remarkably well. They probably do better on average than any other group of men. However, the risks to the marriage falling apart and what that does to a man outweigh the benefits of marriage. That would be a fair argument. I would say, okay, that's a debate. Now we debate. Are the positives outweighed by the negatives if it doesn't work out? And so one of the things you would do is show mitigating strategies. That's why the idea of mitigation is so important. Okay, well, which marriages tend to work out best? Orthodox, Catholic, Mormon, Amish, Muslim, atheist. What is it about that? What is it about those groups? Atheists a bit of an outlier because they get married later in life. But what is it the rest of them? They are sort of these communities that spend a lot of time together, that have built-in mechanisms that are like, marriage is sacred. You shouldn't flippantly get divorced. Prenup, that's a way that you can mitigate. Spending a lot of time with the person you're going to marry before you marry them, as opposed to just randomly hook up with someone and then 3 months later get married. These are strategies that can be employed, and with those mitigations, the perspective of marriage seems a lot more tenable. It seems a lot more beneficial, that the reward outweighs the risk. However, if your value system in life isn't like, I want to have children, I want to have a family, and instead it's, I want my net worth to be as high as possible, then yeah, marriage probably doesn't make sense for you. That's not my worldview. I think that if we look at a secular materialist worldview versus a Christian worldview, or hell, even a worldview that's not Christian, but that prioritizes like family, I think that that latter worldview is better. But if you don't agree with that worldview and you're like, I'm just getting married for money, look, there was a point in time where maybe it made sense. You own a farm, you need labor, get married, have 9 kids. That's increasingly not the case though. There's almost no situation in where a child's going to help your career. Getting married's helping your career. I mean, maybe you could say something, but you get the point. That brings us to Rich Cooper in this debate. Now, at one point in this debate, Rich talks about we need legislation. Andrew agrees with this. So they get to the point where they're talking about solutions. What do we do? What's the solution to this? Men who want families, what should they do? Should they get married or should they not? Should they get rich? As Rich said, well, you should just make a ton of money and then fuck a bitch and buy a house and put her in that house. I mean, Rich's solution is literally live as if you're divorced. It's surreal, but you don't have to take my word for it, right? So Rich at one point is like, we need to change laws. And so Andrew starts saying like, well, here's some legislative solutions we could propose. Here's what those would look like. And Rich just poo-poos it. Nope, like true black pill. Nope, it's not possible. I wish you luck, but it's not possible. I wish you luck, it's not possible. So they go through why the legislative solution that Andrew's offering wouldn't work. And then Andrew's like, all right, then, what's your solution?
Show that there's groundwork for it. Prove that the right wing's been moving those goals. Your turn. What's your solution, Rich?
My solution is a little bit different. I'm more of a enjoy the decline guy, and
So no
understand
solution.
the rules, understand the rules, and navigate your life accordingly. I mean, you operate in an ought to sort of minds. It's like the state ought to do this, and I agree with you. The state ought to do.
Now, you ready to be shocked? Richard's solution is nihilism, black pill. There is no solution. So manage the decline. Go fuck a bunch of bitches. There you have it. That's it. That's the great solution. Well, understand that, as a man, you're screwed. There's nothing you can do. So, hey, just make a lot of money, buy a second house, and fuck a bunch of bitches. That's it. That's the solution. Yes, but you can see the predictable societal decline that'll lead to. It's not really my business. I'm getting mine. That's all I care about. Now, what strikes me with this mentality is just how, and I'm assuming this is actually, most red pill people would adapt this mindset, would probably say this is the point. But it mirrors feminism. And this is the irony that I would say to the feminists all the time. Your ideology, actually, the very people you claim to hate, like those that just treat women as sex objects, they're cheering on feminism more than anyone. Yes, you're right. Don't settle down. Don't get married. Don't have kids. Free abortions. Yep. By the way, come fuck me. Sure. You're doing right, honey. Great job. But what about the predictable problems that'll lead to society? I don't give a fuck. What do I care? I have no obligation or duty to society. I don't give a shit about any of that. Manage the decline. We're all doomed anyways. Might as well go get laid. I mean, I'm sorry. I'll just never be that depressed. And again, I'm not accusing this person of this, but we're talking about this. I'm telling you, the court's clearly biased on these topics. It's not even in doubt. Yes, that's why I started saying it's going to be controversial. But so many of these fans of these manosphere type people, they've been burned. And so it doesn't matter when you're like, look, the solution being offered here is not a good one. This isn't a good solution. There's a lot of things this person is saying, identifying the current situation, saying, look how bad it is. Yep, we agree, it's bad. It's the solution area. And it doesn't matter because what people are going to do is say, but the problem is so bad that I will always side with the person that says treat women more like shit. Always. I'll always side with them. How could you even suggest that there's possibly a good woman out there that you could marry? I got divorced. I got custody taken away from me. Therefore, all women are shit. They all need to be treated like shit. Wait a minute. That's not a good way to manage society. Here's things you could do to be. No, that's not true. How dare you? You fucking rube. You're married to someone who has children to a different relationship, you cock. That's it. That's the debate. That's the discourse. Get a Bugatti. Fuck a bunch of bitches. That's the answer. But what's that do for society? Nothing. We don't give a shit. But what's that do for you? I don't know. I haven't thought it through, but it feels good. Then when someone comes along, it's like, look, I agree. You're identifying a real problem. And in many ways, what you're saying is right. But your solution, I think, is flawed. I think there are things that we could do. Fuck you, simp. That's it. That's the discourse on this. So the solution, so what's the problem? If you get married and you get divorced, 3 problems that was isolated. Alimony, child support payments, and losing custody, and taking your assets. Those are the 3 problems that are outlined. Now, which of those 3, if I had to ask you, if there's any men out there, which of those 3 would be the biggest problem? Alimony, taking your assets, or not getting custody of your children? Yeah, everyone agrees the children. The children, by and large, for most men, that would be it. I'll tell you this much, as a father myself, it'd be horrible if me and my wife ever separated. It would be devastating. But the thing that would keep my life together and positive would be my son. And so if there was some situation where I only got my son every other weekend, it would devastate me. Now, it would suck if half of my wealth, which isn't a lot, but if it got taken by my wife, and it'd suck if I had to pay alimony payments. That too would suck. But it would pale in comparison to keeping me from a meaningful relationship with my son. So there's a problem that's being identified. It's absolutely true about family courts. Yep. Favoring women. Totally get it. So what's his solution? Well, have a kid unmarried. Okay. And when that woman decides, you know what, I'm taking you for child support and custody, then your chances of having a positive outcome are even worse. You're not even married. That's the truth. a lot of times the men don't even pursue custody. They don't even show up for court in those non-married situations. Andrew's whole focus is like coming from the default position is most men would care most about their children. So what's the best situation for the children? If you're not married, the chances of abuse of your child go through the fucking roof. The data is quite clear. Almost every data. I can't even think of a study that I've ever read that doesn't say this. The best situation for kids are two parents living together in the same home. As soon as that ends, the average outcomes for children precipitously go down. In effect, on the most important issue that most men would care about, the question of try to get married using mitigating circumstances, prenups, having a community around you that helps support marriage, versus get rich, buy a second house, knock some chick up, put her in that house, and go visit when you feel like. On the most important issue that most men would agree with their children, Rich's solution literally is starting from the default position of divorce. There's a 40% chance you'll end up divorced, which means that your woman will get your kid and be able to bring strange men into the house. So instead, what you should do is not even live with the woman and kid and leave strange men in the house. A 100% chance of that. Where is the solution there? Now, the only argument that he tries to make, and it's laughable, is somehow you're less likely to split up if you're not officially together. He says, why would a woman that you're putting up in a house and just going over to bang once in a while, why would she ever decide to leave you? I don't know. Why would a married woman that you're paying for everything decide to leave you? Same idea. Because she's bored with you? Because she wants to bang someone else? Because she thinks there's a better deal coming? I don't know. Even rich people's wives cheat on them and leave them. Same argument. Now here's the truth, and I am going to say something to impugn Rich here. I don't know if Rich has children or not. I don't know. But when you listen to him and a lot of the other people that talk like him, I don't think they particularly give a shit about their kids that much. I don't think that's high on their priority list. He was like, yeah, you just spend like an hour or two a day with the kids. That's enough. I'm not here to tell you exactly how to parent or how much time, but I mean, really? I mean, your ideal relationship is you go have dinner with this woman and your kid for an hour and then send the kid to bed and fuck your woman and go home? Good enough. That's good parenting. I mean, to me, it's just like, I think you'd rather fucking have the Bugatti and say, you know what? Maybe I don't want to go to that chick's house tonight. Maybe I want to go over to this chick's house and hook up with her. That sounds more exciting. That's what it seems like to me. Now, maybe I'm wrong. He didn't really talk about his personal situation, so I guess it's hard to see. So much of this shit to me is just black-pilled nihilism. Yeah, and he keeps saying, why are you talking about the kids? Because I would die for my son. That's the most important. That doesn't mean that as a father, you should have to live like a slave and fucking miserable your entire life just for the well-being of your kid. I get that, right? But that is the highest priority. Next, alimony. Less than 10% of divorces end up with any form of alimony. It doesn't seem to be as big of a problem as he's suggesting. Still not good. I think oftentimes the idea of alimony is farcical. And then the idea of taking half your shit. While it is true, most divorces don't end up like that. But the ones that do, that's fucking horrible. There are men like Matt Groening of The Simpsons. I heard about his, that dude got fucked. He created one of the biggest TV shows of all time. Huge amounts of money. And he still sends like 20% of that shit to his lady. Terrible. I'm not saying there aren't horror stories, but it's like, well, here's some advice on how to maybe have a marriage that works out. And here's why that's wonderful. And that's something you should want. And here's why it's better for the children. And here's why it's better for society. And then Rich's argument's like, yeah, but there's still risk. So I think you should just do this. And it's like, yeah, but there's incredible risk to what you're suggesting. Yeah, but still, I don't know, right? I'm not a deep thinker. I'm not a philosopher, right? What is the meaning in life? What's best in life? This guy had an answer, right? He had an answer. Crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and hear the lamentations of their women. I guess it's subjective. I hope that you're religious. I hope that you're Christian. I hope that you come to that conclusion, but I'm not here to preach to you. I don't know. I guess we all make our own decision, right? For me, it's more than just about, I accumulated the most stuff. When I'm on my deathbed, I'm like, thank God I bought that yacht. Rich even says that. What does it mean to be successful? To have the most stuff, to be the richest. That's being successful. Andrew's like, what about Nikola Tesla? He was very successful, created all these things, but he died poor. Was he successful? Nope, because it was all stolen from him. Andrew says, okay, so you're rich, right? Rich Cooper's got a lot of money. Uh-huh. What if someone steals all of his money? Is he no longer successful? And Richie's like, this is silly. That's the point. I don't have a yacht yet. I've been too busy working on my second floor attic studio.